Oh my God, they had to.
Yes, like the staff was basically told we're taking customer funds to pay our own debts.
Can you imagine you're on the level, you work there and you're on the level and all of a sudden your CEO says that?
Yeah, you gotta leave.
You gotta run. Run.
Yeah, they did, and they did.
This is Leah McGrath Goodman, and you're listening to Column C.
Do you want a beanbag?
No, I don't. I do want to sleep under a desk, though. That would be good. I could sleep under a desk. I'm so underslept right now.
All right.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story of Sam Bankman-Fried. Listen, my friends, and you will hear a story of a 30-year-old man from Silicon Valley who somehow started a crypto exchange and in just a few years really blew it up. But before that, it was valued at $32 billion, and he got the toast of Silicon Valley investing in him, and he was worth billions of dollars not too long ago. And it all started because he wanted to start a crypto trading firm, and he called it ALAMEDA Trading, and he started it with one of his colleagues, and it went pretty well. It started in 2017, and they decided to also create a crypto exchange, which they called FTX. And they started that also in Berkeley, California. All of these things started in Berkeley initially. And around 2019, they moved the FTX exchange to Hong Kong for the official launch. They launched it, and Alameda Trading did a ton of its business through the FTX crypto exchange. So Alameda Trading was like a crypto hedge fund. It's like making bets on crypto assets, right? So it could be any number of things. There's so many crypto assets now, but a crypto asset could be Bitcoin, it could be Ethereum, it could be Solana, it could be Polkadot. There's so many kinds of digital assets now, but a lot of the offshore ones, you can trade much higher risk things offshore that are outside of U.S. regulation and U.S. law. So they started this FTX exchange in Hong Kong, and by 2021, they moved it to the Bahamas, and that is where most of the drama takes place in this story.
And they use Alameda, like when they start FTX, they've got this big client already that they already own. So they use one business to kind of jumpstart the exchange.
Yeah, they seem to want to have their own exchange. That's been a hot thing. A lot of people starting their own crypto exchanges. You know, Coinbase is a crypto exchange. Lots of U.S. customers for Coinbase. But, you know, Binance is also a crypto exchange, and Binance is also offshore. Mm-hmm. So they started this crypto exchange. What was interesting is when they went to the Bahamas, they actually wanted to get a trading license in Antigua and Barbuda, and they went there, which is its own little twin island nation, and they tried to get a trading license, but they were denied because the regulators were like, we don't understand your business model. We don't like your business model. We don't understand it. We're not going to give you a trading license. So they went ahead and registered there, but then went over to the Bahamas and got a trading license there. So this weird offshore exchange was registered in one tax shelter, but was trading in another tax shelter. And they set up an office in a penthouse in the Bahamas. Apparently, roughly 10 of the top executives were there, and they were running this exchange. So there was the offshore exchange in the Bahamas. There was also a U.S. version of the exchange called FTX US. The whole enterprise was sort of called FTX.com. So if you typed FTX.com into your computer and you looked, it would be, you know, whatever was appropriate to you. If you're in the U.S., you'd probably be seeing the U.S. exchange. Offshore, you'd be seeing the Bahamas exchange, which had global customers.
But these are all separate entities in a way.
Yeah. So the main, this is what happens when you deal with offshore entities, right? So the Antigua entity was called FTX Trading Limited. It was sort of the holding company of all the other exchange trading entities. So it was sort of the one that was the umbrella. And then everything was under it, like the Bahamas exchange, the U.S. exchange, etc. So the U.S. exchange was mainly dealing with U.S. customers. The Bahamas exchange apparently had some U.S. customers, but I don't know exactly how that happened, but, you know, was mainly global customers. And
I just want to follow up a little bit on that.
Yeah.
So each one of these companies, I mean, they literally each have their own kind of pot.
yeah, they're supposed to be, because the laws apply differently to different locations and different entities based in different places. Yes, it was supposed to, money definitely should have been handled differently in different places, but it doesn't look like that's what happens. So, yeah. And most importantly, Alameda Trading was really like what we would consider a proprietary trading firm, right? So like hedge fund is not for regular customers, regular people. It was a fund specifically focused on making bets in crypto and making money if they did well and losing money if they didn't, just like any other trading firm. It's basically gambling. And that was not supposed to be related to customers' assets at the exchange that was called FTX, right?
How did they do?
So Alameda for some time was reporting billions of dollars in assets, but crypto got hammered in 2022. The prices of crypto assets did not do very well last year, and there was a whole lot of loss. And a lot of different firms either blew up, or there were hedge funds that went under. There were whole cryptocurrencies that went under. And so crypto assets took a real beating last year.
Should we talk about why, or is it not relevant?
Crypto seems to follow a lot of its own. Last year was a tough year in general for markets. Things got really volatile because we've been raising interest rates in the United States. But also there's been the war on Ukraine and Russia. Energy prices went up. There's like a lot of macro stuff to go through. But basically crypto was going through, they were calling it the crypto winter last year. So for purposes of telling the story, crypto got hammered. And so as a result, the trading side of this company that Sam Bankman-Fried started, Alameda Trading, had its own issues, but it wasn't the only part of the business that was having trouble. Other parts of the business were also struggling. They started dipping into customer assets, according to U.S. authorities. They were taking customer money to fill in holes in the business. Alameda Trading in particular was able to tap into customer money to continue its trading and to continue its investments. And this part of the company was 90% owned by Sam Bankman-Fried. He was understood to be calling the shots on FTX and Alameda Trading. And so at this point, he's in some pretty big trouble because people have questions about where all this customer money went.
For people like me, what he's doing is not lawful.
Yeah, taking customer money is considered. I've been covering Wall Street for a really long time, and exchanges in particular. You do not touch customer money. Customer money is considered in the parlance of exchanges segregated customer funds. There should be a Chinese wall between the customer funds, just like when you go to the bank and you deposit money. The bank can't mix your money with its own bank funds, right? Like, so if a bank is paying its staff, for example, or the bank is building a new bank, it can't go into your bank account to fund that. And so it's considered on Wall Street, if you take customer money or even touch customer money or put it at risk, that is criminal. You cannot do that. You can go to jail for a long time. Not only that, your whole firm can go under, because once you're touching customer money, you're considered to not be very solvent, right? Most firms don't do anything with customer money unless they're utterly desperate. And then at that point, they have to make a decision, right? And the right decision is, okay, we're about to go under. Do we touch the customer money? And the answer is no. You go under and you return the customer's money to the customers. That's what you're supposed to do. On Wall Street, you do not do what they call commingling customer funds, which is when you start mixing the corporate funds with the customer funds. So Sam Bankman-Fried, who's only 30 years old, who started this company in 2017, he's now accused by U.S. authorities of money laundering, defrauding customers and lenders, committing securities and commodities conspiracy, and violating campaign finance laws, because he was also he and other executives at the company were donating millions to politicians and leaders in Washington to affect elections.
He had this whole scheme, right? Like the company would give these people money that they could in turn donate to these politicians. But really, that's how they did. That was where they broke the law, right?
So the intricacies of how the money was loaned to executives is still being sort of parsed out. But I actually have a little piece here that I can read to you that's actually from one of the complaints. some of these are amazing. I mean, they're just, here's one of the statements. This is from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which brought charges against FTX's executives, specifically Sam Bankman-Fried, but it definitely names other executives at the company. It says Bankman-Fried and other FTX executives also took hundreds of millions of dollars in poorly documented quote unquote loans from ALAMEDA Trading that they used to purchase luxury real estate and property for themselves and or family members, make political donations, and for other unauthorized uses. These unauthorized uses of customer assets were not disclosed to or known by FTX customers, and they mean FTX customers whose money they were taking. We know that Sam Bankman-Fried's parents, who were professors at Stanford University.
There's a whole other piece of it. It's like
their
incredible.
names are on some of the property that was purchased. Did they know that some of this was customer money? Who knows? That whole other piece. The whole other piece here, my friends, is that Sam Bankman-Fried grew up on this Stanford campus. His parents were professors. They were really high up tax policy wonks who actually believed in reporting your taxes, and
well regarded,
very well regarded.
People.
Worked with presidents of the United States and with high level leaders across the country and in California to try to add transparency to our tax system, reform our tax system. His dad was famous for reporting taxes on his poker game winnings. That was just like recreational poker games he'd play with his friends. They were really about being above board. And it's very strange that people like that would end up in this situation.
The parents, they're starting to do some real work, get some real changes made, and now their credibility is just...
Yeah, it would be really hard.
They're done.
It'd be really hard to see them getting a whole lot of, they were making headway at any rate. It'd be really hard to see them making headway now, which... I said this offline to Reggie before we started the podcast. I said it's a little too on the nose that they got pulled into this and how they would have gotten pulled into this. These are not foolish people. They're very intelligent. It's possible their idealism blinded them. I can see that. And maybe somebody listening will say, well, Leah's taking these people too seriously. They were obviously hypocrites. I get it. But I really believe as a child of teachers, where you would sit around the dinner table trying to talk about how to improve the world and talking about philosophy and talking about history. And I just have to believe that being such highly trained, and the father, a highly trained lawyer, and how is it that they just didn't see this one coming or weren't more alert to what was going on? It's possible it could have been that they didn't realize their son was in this deep. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think we do want to listen to the story. If their story is ever going to get told, I think it's worth hearing.
On the nose. Yes.
Yeah. It's, I get little flags that pop up for me when I look at stories. And one of the flags for me in this is, how did this mess with tax shelters and stolen customer money, not just stolen customer money, but there were hacks going on too. Like this exchange was being hacked as it went bankrupt, hundreds of millions of dollars lost. How that happened. There were a lot of things that happened here. And I think the fact that the parents were such high level experts in tax and tax policy while this was all going on, and lawyer, the father helped set up the legal framework for this company. So I think we do want to hear from them. I do. Mm-hmm. I'm genuinely interested in if they ever speak up what they want to say about it. And they may not ever feel they can be frank because their son is now facing criminal charges, but they're standing by him. They're not saying, hey, our son misled us. So it's like, so what's the truth? But right now, Sam Bankman-Fried, he's already pled not guilty to all 8 charges brought against him. These were criminal charges brought against him last month. Sam Bankman-Fried, I should say, isn't right now. He's under house arrest in California at his parents' home. And he's wearing, the ankle bracelet. And he's also doing interviews with the press. He's continuing to issue statements. And he's no longer the CEO of FTX. It's now being taken over by a leadership team that is more or less liquidating assets and trying to save customer money to make customers whole again.
Their whole world is imploding. I mean, it's on. There's nothing. There's no analog to this that I don't even. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about the exchange. We already covered that they were giving major political donations
And you're talking about the 10 who are the executives?
So there are a number of executives, but the key executives that we're going to talk about today are Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the CEO of ALAMEDA Trading in the beginning. And he was throughout the CEO of FTX, the exchange. He apparently dated a woman named Caroline Ellison, who became the co-CEO of ALAMEDA Trading and eventually the full CEO. It's unclear when they dated exactly and when they broke up exactly. But the fact that FTX and ALAMEDA Trading had shared funds that they shouldn't have with each other and were always perceived to be too close to each other. You know, an exchange really shouldn't be that close to a crypto hedge fund, right? But ALAMEDA was bringing FTX a lot of its early business and then eventually was using FTX customer money to make investments. So what was her background that she now has this job? I mean, she was definitely also like Sam Bankman-Fried. We're going to call him SBF just to make it easy. That was the name that everybody used for him once he became really famous. Everybody just referred to him as SBF, his initials. But she also had like a hedge fund investment type background. She came from a firm in New York that specialized in that sort of investing. She said she was never a crypto fanatic, but that she got involved in ALAMEDA Trading. And she's young too. I think she's just 28 even now. Most of these people are American. Most of the executives we're going to be talking about they're American, and they were involved in these companies from early on. The other person is somebody who goes by the name Gary Wang. He was a coder and also the co-CEO of FTX, ALAMEDA Trading. He was the co-founder, and he kind of started ALAMEDA Trading with SBF at the very start in 2017. Right, For anyone listening wondering, what is ALAMEDA Trading? It's a crypto hedge fund, but it was also sort of the sacred calf. It was the original entity. It was the one that started the whole thing. So every time it started to have a problem, it seems like it was able to dip into customer funds to solve the problem or to get a new credit line when it needed more money for something. I mean,
they were sketchy from the outset. They were doing things they shouldn't have been doing early on.
It seems that authorities who have brought these charges mostly agree that the bad behavior goes back to at least 2019. It seems like at least May 2019. And that using customer money dated back years. That's the allegations anyway. One of the things I want to say about Gary Wang is it mentions that he was involved in the relationship between ALAMEDA Trading and FTX that was really problematic. It says at Bankman-Fried's direction, this is the Commodity Futures Trading Commission that said this, the CFTC. It said at Bankman-Fried's direction, FTX executives, including Wang, created features in the underlying code for FTX that allowed ALAMEDA Trading to maintain an unlimited line of credit on FTX. And at SBF's direction, FTX executives, including Wang, also created other exceptions to FTX's standard processes that allowed ALAMEDA to have an unfair advantage when transacting on the exchange, such as quicker execution times of trades and an exemption from the platform's auto liquidation risk management process, which is when trades are automatically sold off when they're getting into hot water. Basically, they'll just sell them before they have a greater loss, right? Oh my God. So it basically had all these exceptions in the code, and it looks like Wang was involved in a lot of that. There was another engineer who was also involved, supposedly SBF, Gary Wang, and this other engineer, I believe his name is Nishad Singh, and he was an engineer who also was basically these three, according to executives at FTX, were the ones who had the codes that could reach customer money without any approvals.
I'm trying to make this all work in my head because this is all new for me.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's like video games where it's like one of the players has like infinite lives. Like it's in the code. Like they can't die. That's cheating. Like, oh my God, it's in the code.
It's in the code, and it allowed ALAMEDA Trading. So remember, this is like a hedge fund that was supposed to be its own animal. Like it was supposed to be SBF's crypto hedge fund that he was running with some colleagues, but it was its own thing, separate from FTX, which was an exchange for people, right? For customers. So it did have a professional relationship, but it was not supposed to be something where it got unfair advantage, and certainly not access to customer money. The thing anyone listening to a story has to understand is customer money is sacrosanct. Yeah. You just don't touch it. Doesn't matter who has it. Yeah. You don't touch it. You leave it alone. You let the customer do what they want with their own account. You do not go into their account. You do not go into funds that are, if it's a lot of customer money that's kept separate, you do not go into that either. You're trusting the exchange to be more or less act like a bank would, keeping your account safe. And so an exchange is supposed to offer safety to the customer. It's certainly not supposed to have a trading firm offshoot that can go into your account and grab stuff. Yeah. So one thing I'm just going to mention also that I wanted to share, this had to do with what was happening with the commingling of funds. We talked about the code. We talked about executives taking loans from the company, which was also really problematic. The company was actually loaning hundreds of millions of dollars to its own executives. And some of that money was customer money.
He was both the loaner and the receiver on some of those.
Yeah, he wasn't personally the loaner. It was his company.
But
right?
his name was on both lines.
He was receiving loans from the company. And yes, I believe he did some of the documents. He certainly authorized what happened. And so here's this other charge that was brought, the CFTC's complaint, I thought was some of the best reading. It said, without disclosure to FTX customers, ALAMEDA Trading and FTX commingled assets, this is customer assets, and freely use FTX customer assets as if they were their own, including as capital to deploy in their own trading and investment activities. On information and belief, Bankman-Fried, his parents, and other FTX and ALAMEDA employees use FTX customer assets for a variety of personal expenditures, including luxury real estate purchases, private jets, documented and undocumented personal loans, and personal political donations. So it was really kind of a free-for-all piggy bank situation, only it was billions of dollars of customers' funds from around the world.
It was high assholery.
Is that a DOJ charge or is that a...
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Is that SEC, DOJ, or CFTC?
I don't know. I can't keep them all straight. It's very sexy. All of these, yeah.
I've never heard of all these agencies called sexy, but they certainly all came to this party. And it's part of the reason why he's facing, I think it's up to 115 years in prison.
Yeah.
That's outrageous we know everyone saw during the 2008 financial crisis, everybody saw that almost no one went to jail. And yet this, over 100 years potential jail time. Okay, you want to hear a little more about what happened, how this all went down?
Yeah. I have a feeling. Yeah. No, I'm not ready, but
okay, I'm going to tell you. Hold on. My Pepsi bottle is going to roll right down this table. Yeah, we don't, you know what? I would love to have a glass of wine while talking about one of these things, but I just don't want to get any of this wrong. So I don't think wine is a good idea tonight. Maybe afterward I'll have something. Okay, so here's what happened. The crypto market really tanked this year. We saw a lot of flameouts. We saw hedge funds blow up. We saw individual crypto investors lose a lot of their money. We saw whole cryptocurrencies blow up, like Terraform Labs, which is based in South Korea, another tax shelter for crypto. They had a token called Luna, and that went way up and then tanked and basically flamed out. And this was just the year for crypto. This was the crypto winter this past year. 2022 was a crypto winter. Yes, markets were terrible. Bonds didn't do well. Stocks didn't do well. It was not a really great markets year, and we're not looking at a great year coming up either.
But FTX was like a horror movie or just an apocalyptic, like it happened fast, right?
It definitely happened fast. So apparently things had been going wrong behind the scenes for some time. As we know, they were tipping into customer funds as far back as 2019. So what happened going into November was there were some shortfalls in in money. So this is one of the accounts, and I'm going to read from this because I want to make sure it's accurate, but also because I thought this was really helpful to understanding what went down. On the morning of November 9th, this past November, at approximately 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the announcement of the then contemplated acquisition by Binance. So Binance was another exchange at this time, was going to buy FTX because FTX was starting to show signs of instability. And Binance said, yeah, we'll look at you and we might buy you.
I've heard them described as frenemies.
Yeah, so Binance was also a competitor of FTX. Now, Binance is also an offshore crypto exchange of dubious repute, one might say, mainly because they often play hide and seek with information themselves. But Binance looked at the books and apparently weren't happy with what they saw and backed out of buying FTX. While this is all going on, Caroline Ellison, who is the CEO at this point of ALAMEDA Trading, which is the sacred lamb of the FTX enterprise and was the crypto hedge fund that led to quite a bit of losses for customer money, but also for the whole exchange. Caroline Ellison held, quote unquote, an all hands meeting with ALAMEDA staff on November 9th. This is in the morning. In that meeting, Ellison acknowledged that earlier that year, she, Bankman-Fried, and other individuals had decided to use FTX customer assets to pay ALAMEDA's debts, and that Wang and another FTX executive were aware of this. Specifically in that meeting, Ellison stated that, quote, starting last year, this would be referring to 2021, starting last year at this point, ALAMEDA was borrowing, quote, a bunch of money by open term loans, unquote, and used those assets to, quote, make very illiquid investments, unquote.
What are you reading?
I'm reading from the CFTC complaint. Okay. Ellison further explained that following the widespread decline of digital asset prices, most of ALAMEDA's loans had been recalled, and in order to meet those recalls, ALAMEDA borrowed, quote, a bunch of funds, unquote, from FTX, which in turn led to FTX having a shortfall in user funds, meaning customer funds.
Oh my God.
Ellison informed ALAMEDA staff that FTX had, quote, always allowed, unquote, ALAMEDA to borrow customer assets.
Oh my God.
And did not require collateral for those loans. So they didn't have to put up anything for these loans. She also explained that ALAMEDA could access user assets without requiring approval, as the structure allowed ALAMEDA to go negative. In response to an employee question, Ellison also acknowledged some other mistakes she made and some misleading statements she had made. And then she expressed remorse. Shortly after this meeting, most of ALAMEDA's staff resigned.
Oh my God, they had to. Can you imagine?
I paraphrased a little bit of this just to not make it more complicated.
Yeah.
I just want to say that. But this section can be found under point 107 on the CFTC complaint if anybody needs to check it. And yes, like the staff was basically told we're taking customer funds to pay our own debts.
Can you imagine you're on the level, you work there and you're on the level and all of a sudden your CEO says that?
Yeah. You gotta leave.
You gotta run.
Yeah, they did. And they did. So this is November 9th. By November 10th, SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, was resigning. He was signing his own resignation. He was turning the company over to John Ray III, who is now the insolvency lawyer who's taking over and trying to get customers' funds returned to them to whatever extent that they can.
Was he compelled to do that? How did that happen?
He took legal counsel and was persuaded to turn the company over for bankruptcy. By the time they filed for bankruptcy on November 11th, 134 different entities, many of them offshore tax shelter entities, filed for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And so this was the beginning of the end for Sam Bankman-Fried running FTX. But here's what's even more interesting. In the middle of this early November period, FTX's Bahamas exchange, which is the one that weirdly was solvent, even though customer money was being taken. The Bahamas regulators were tipped off even before the filing for bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And they did not do anything to apprehend Sam Bankman-Fried, even though he was sitting in a penthouse in the Bahamas, basically denying being at fault, right? They found this out. And so they did suspend the registration for the Bahamas exchange, which was the main exchange, the main offshore exchange. They suspended the license and they froze the assets, and they began the process of, again, trying to make sure assets didn't end up disappearing. But they didn't do anything about Sam. They basically just had him sitting in his penthouse until the U.S. courts unsealed an order to arrest Sam Bankman-Fried. That was over 1 month later. So it was over a month that the Bahamas was aware that he had been accused of stealing customer funds, he and other executives at FTX. And even though the Bahamas stopped, froze the ability of those funds to disappear, although there were still hacks. Even though they did that, they did not apprehend Sam Bankman-Fried, even though what he had done, according to the authorities, had been illegal and that they should have apprehended him. It was only when the U.S. moved to extradite him that they moved in and arrested him and brought him to jail to await his extradition. That was in early December when that took place.
Was it you, or were you quoting someone in your story where you were talking about how he clearly had a lot of influence there?
Yeah, so Sam Bankman-Fried had been very involved with the leadership in the Bahamas. He'd been sort of like a golden child. He put them on the map. They really wanted to be like the best next thing for crypto. He really made them look good for a long time. He was buying hundreds of millions in real estate. His parents had this fancy home that was apparently purchased with money from FTX. And so, and he said that this was with his own earnings, but it's really unclear now. What was his earnings?
What that even means, yeah.
Like, what does it mean? I mean, the bankruptcy liquidators aren't even sure how much money is left. They keep coming out with new numbers. I frankly am not sure myself, because most of the numbers reflect what the company estimated in November when they filed for bankruptcy, but a lot of those crypto assets have changed in value. And then there were hacks. There's still not a lot of information about who hacked the exchange and took money, but we do know that a few executives at FTX had the codes. Right. So, what really happened, it's still unclear. They're still trying to investigate it. Sam Bankman-Fried saying he's not behind the hacks. He had nothing to do with the hacks. He's speaking from house arrest now in California.
The forensic people are saying they think it's going to take them 10 years to unpack that.
Yeah, some of the academics who are watching this and others who are looking closely at the case are saying this could take many years to unravel. I don't think they're ever going to really know what happened to all the money, because this is a problem with the records were so poor. They can't track things because those records just don't exist, right?
Say that again.
Say what?
We need to hammer this, because that's part of why
offshore tax shelters are so problematic.
Well, or in this case specifically, where there's just like no records. Ray, he's going, he's looking at it and he's just like, they can't figure out what happened because the records were so poor. Like, they just don't exist, or they exist in these really weird messaging apps. And at one point they said like their whole thing was broken down in QuickBooks.
Yeah.
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 And he was funny because he was like, no disrespect to QuickBooks, but you shouldn't be running your multi-billion-dollar business. But they were.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that needs to be highlighted here is that, expenses were approved. One of the famous quotes from this was, expenses were being approved by emoji. Right. So there are all these text messages where major decisions were being made. Sam Bankman-Fried is obviously going to fight this. He was trying to say he's innocent of all these charges. John Ray, who's the new insolvency lawyer, CEO of FTX, he's worked on some of the largest corporate bankruptcies and failures in the history of the United States, from Enron to he also worked on Nortel Networks, and he's done this for 40 years. And to point out what you were just saying, Reg, he said this was a, quote, complete failure of any internal controls or governance whatsoever. He said the records were so horrendous. This is in testimony to U.S. lawmakers. Yeah. John Ray said, we are in many respects starting from near zero in terms of corporate infrastructure and record keeping that one would expect to find in a multi-billion-dollar international business.
If people are interested in the story, watch this guy's testimony, because it's good. He's a straight talker. He's a straight shooter. And I actually feel like any gleaning of understanding that I have of this case at all is listening to him, because he's like the anti-Sam.
He's kind of amazing. I mean, he basically said that there were, I want to say, it was, this was sort of terrifying to hear as somebody who deals with information. Mm-hmm. He actually said that they are now combing through a convoluted web of entities spanning the globe that FTX set up, many, again, in these opaque tax shelters. So tax shelters aren't in and of themselves bad, right? But if they have loose regulations, they will create a situation of what we would say, like, it's murky, it's opaque, like it's hard to see what's going on. And the regulatory authorities may not always be demanding transparency. So to be going through the data now through all of these global entities and trying to unravel and unwind what took place is requiring a team of forensic analysts, investigators, tax consultants, and cybersecurity experts to track all the money flows and all the asset transfers. And Ray said it's comprising billions of individual transactions and dozens of terabytes of data.
Right.
That's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's basically like, if you see him testify, this is what you were talking about. He's like, don't worry, we've done this before. It's under control. I mean, it's going to be a pain, but we're going to get there. That is just unbelievably reassuring because you can't even believe the work that's going to go into it. It's very daunting to even read about. Crypto is all about secrecy and anonymity, and everyone knows that because a lot of these trades are on the blockchain, it's not like invisible,
right?
But you don't necessarily know who's behind transactions. And then you move these things onto tax shelters, makes it even harder to understand what's going on. And one of the things John Ray said toward the end of his testimony, he had said, we're working around the clock to locate and secure property of the estate, the FTX estate, a substantial portion of which may be missing, misappropriated, or not readily traceable due to a lack of proper record keeping.
And the whole round the clock thing, like, he's not kidding. And like, you want to talk about why? Because like the money's flying all over the place, right?
Yeah, the thing is it's already been hacked, right? We already know hundreds of millions of dollars have been extracted through at least one major hack that took place in November, but it looks like there was additional money that may have leaked. Digital assets themselves may be depleting in value because people know now that a lot of this stuff is suspect, right? So the value itself can be going down. That's less customer money to go back to the customers, right? The whole idea here is to recover as much money as possible, identify which customers lost their money, and get them as much back as possible. And a lot of them aren't going to get their money back, right? It's, right now, FTX, I made a little list here of FTX's tax shelters. So obviously, ALAMEDA was based in Delaware, which is a tax shelter,
right.
the crypto hedge fund. They had a financial transmitter in South Dakota, and then another tax shelter, well-known tax shelter in the United States, and then all these low to no tax secrecy jurisdictions around the world, like British Virgin Islands, Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, Panama, the Seychelles, Turkey, Nigeria, Australia, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong. And that's just like what we're able to see readily. I saw a number of other locations. I think I saw a bunch of stuff in Ireland when I did a little more digging. And I even saw, right after I published this story in Institutional Investor about FTX and tax shelters, I found one of the major companies identified by SBF that's in bankruptcy had ties to Jersey, of course. It's like London, New York, Jersey. Yeah. And I actually need to find out a little bit more about that. But there were so many companies that even the top 7 companies that Sam Bankman-Fried identified, he actually misspelled, or like one of the companies was spelled 2 different ways.
What's your
not even sure how to say their own company names because there are just too many of them.
What's your, I don't know, can you give your take on that? I mean, you said in the story it's not suspicious necessarily, but
yeah, if so basically the bankruptcy documents referred to something called Cedar Grove Technologies Services Limited. And then on Bankman-Fried's signing page of the same documents where he authorized the bankruptcy and the takeover by a new CEO to sort this out, he called it Cedar Grove Technology Services Limited. So it's technologies versus technology. I assume this is the same company, but the fact that like this was one of his top companies and he's mixing up the name. So it just goes to show you that like all these companies are just really like a big jumble. I don't think it's suspicious, and a misspelling isn't suspicious or showing of
Just
any.
sort of how fast and loose they were with everything.
Yeah. It's just like, it just shows how like junky and jumbled the list of companies got, even to the people running the companies.
And how not serious they were with this responsibility they have of people's billions of dollars.
Yes. Now, here's what I found really interesting about this whole story, because we care about tax shelters and because we know that
we're finally getting to the interesting part.
Is this the interesting part? So basically, while the company's going under, Sam Bankman-Fried has still not been arrested, right? He got arrested December 12th, right? And in the meantime, he's in his fancy Bahamas penthouse. Supposedly at this point, his parents have come to join him or were already there. And he is like still on Twitter. You know, what's kind of amazing, he was about to go give testimony to Congress, right? Congress had called him. He said he was going to come and give his own testimony about what went wrong. Mm-hmm. He's on Twitter and he's saying, F the regulators, they make everything worse. This is after his own company filed for bankruptcy. Then he's supposed to go to Congress to give testimony, but instead, the night before, he gets arrested in his Bahamas digs. And a lot of people argued, that's, why was he prevented from giving testimony? I did talk to some of my sources about this. The feeling was, and I think this is probably pretty accurate, the feeling was this guy won't shut up. And he also gave millions of dollars to these politicians who he's going to be talking to on Capitol Hill. We just don't need any more of a mess. Basically, those authorities who were going to take him to court and accused him of stealing customer money. We're talking about law enforcement, right? Yeah. We're not talking about congressmen. We're talking law enforcement.
Yeah, different.
Yeah, law enforcement is like, right, we really just don't need him chatting with the people he gave millions of dollars to. It's like pointless for us. He could say things to hang himself, but he could also end up grandstanding, and then maybe somebody he donated to ends up trying to make him look good, or they just didn't need the crap. And so the overwhelming feeling was, let's just not go through all that. Let's just get him into a position where he's being extradited and immediately having to have a more regimented relationship with law enforcement. I don't think they wanted to see the performance because they didn't buy it. And they didn't really want it to continue to poison the environment. I think they also were worried about how are we going to bring him to court if there's so much murkiness surrounding what went wrong, right? Because there's a lot of that about, is this jury going to look at things fairly if there's been a lot of pre-prejudicing, right? Right. That's like a big deal.
That's what he's doing. I mean, they feel like that's what he's doing now. Like he's recently is making statements and doing interviews.
Yeah. I mean, once law enforcement gets involved, there is like a big push to not pollute jury pools and not make things harder for a jury to actually assess a case because it got so messy in advance. So I'm not saying that was why, but it looked...
It could totally be coincidence. It could totally be coincidence.
I don't think it was coincidence.
Okay. Yeah. But in fairness, it could be.
My understanding was that the law enforcement side made a determination that they did not need this political dog and pony show to take place while they were trying to actually apprehend him. And I think also something about having him just march into Congress like everything was fine and spout a whole bunch of stuff that nobody believed on the law enforcement side. I think they just did not want to hear it and felt like it was a little bit, it's kind of like if you have somebody, who's constantly gaslighting you. Mm-hmm. I think that's how they felt. I think they were like, I think we've had enough gaslighting. We don't need to put it on a national stage.
No, and it would legitimize him to even have him in that room, I feel like, right?
I think there was a feeling that it would legitimize somebody who needed to be put in his place. I think that was the feeling. I also think that there was a lack of trust of members of Congress who had received millions of dollars in donations from this man and his colleagues. So there were a number of reasons, but in hindsight, you can see why that was not a desirable situation for the law enforcement side of things. I'm not defending anybody's decisions here. I'm completely neutral, but meaning I'm not neutral about thieving customer money, but as a journalist, I'm pretty neutral on like who's running the show because I'm a reporter. Okay, so he is arrested. And what's fascinating, there's some really interesting scenes because he's still in the Bahamas, right? And they come in, the Bahamian authorities don't arrest him, but because the U.S. authorities are insisting, he gets arrested. And he goes in and
they're cranky at each other.
Yeah. At this point, the U.S. is not pleased with the Bahamas, and the Bahamas is quite irritated because it feels like the U.S. is interfering with what it feels is its own legal jurisdiction. And so SBF's arrest on December 12th by the Royal Bahamas Police Force and his extradition to the U.S. took place on December 21st, right? So right before the Christmas holidays. The solstice, the darkest day of the year, he was extradited to the U.S. So he's in the courtroom in the Bahamas. He makes this unexpected appearance. His Bahamian lawyer is standing there in shock because somehow Sam Bankman-Fried has emerged from jail to be in the courtroom that day, and his hands are shaking, and he's basically insisting on seeing the federal indictment against him before he agrees to be extradited. But also, he doesn't want to be in this jail, right? Apparently, the Bahamas jail is a total tip and a really bad place to be. So ultimately, he agrees to this extradition because after putting up this $250 million bail, which was insane. $250 million bail. He gets to hang out in house arrest at his parents' home.
That suddenly makes a little more sense now.
Which part?
That figure, because I'm like, why the hell are they? That's a lot of money. Even for anyone, that's a lot of money. He's not going to skip out on that.
He's not. Then they did not have to actually pay technically $250 million. Bail apparently is, I don't know all about how bail works because thank God I haven't had to go through it. But apparently you really only put down a fraction of that, but you're on the hook for all of it if you skip. So that was basically what happened. He went through the holidays and through the New Year. He's still, under house arrest right now. And he's pleading not guilty to all 8 counts of the U.S. criminal charges against him. However, and at this point, the authorities are saying $8 billion of customer deposits went missing because of the behavior of his exchange. And 2 of the major high-level executives at FTX who work closely with him have already pleaded guilty to the federal criminal charges in connection with the collapse of FTX. And one of them is Caroline Ellison, his ex. He has confirmed that they were together at one point. He also seems to be looking to blame his colleagues for what happened. And then it looks like they're looking to blame him. So this entire story is going to get probably weirder before it gets less weird. It says they've agreed to cooperate with prosecutors as key witnesses to the alleged crimes, and if convicted on all the charges, SBF faces up to 115 years in prison. It's going to be really interesting first to see what John Ray and these experts come up with in terms of what happened to the money, right? It's going to be interesting to see who was behind the hacks, if we can ever find out who that was. It's going to be interesting to see what the other executives, apparently, according to SBF, so he is talking from house arrest. It does one thing he seems to not stop doing is talk.
Well, he's got a Substack, and he wrote this whole essay that I read it. It meant nothing to me.
He basically wrote an essay about how the exchange itself, if allowed to keep going, could more or less resurrect itself.
He's saying they were solvent. He's like, no, we can pay our bills. We can totally do it. And he's like, here's my spreadsheet from QuickBooks. It's all right there.
Yeah, the problem is they took customer money. Yeah. I don't think many people are going to want to put their money at an exchange that was found out for losing $8 billion in estimated customer funds.
Did you see his muse today, Ray? Yeah, he's talking about he's like, well, that's one thing we're looking at is opening it back up.
Yes. Yeah. I think we talked about that too. There is this discussion of finding a way to salvage part of the exchange. I don't know if that's possible. It is true that the Bahamas exchange was not insolvent. It's part of the reason why the U.S. Yeah. So what happened is the U.S. and the Bahamas started fighting with each other. One of the only solvent parts of this company remaining was the Bahamas exchange, right? So even though they were taking customer money, they didn't take so much it was insolvent. It's part of the reason why they were taking from there was because there was money there. So it looks like the Bahamas and the U.S. now have this sort of uneasy peace where they're going to try to work together to share information and try to restore customer money. But there's still a lot of questions about why the Bahamas acted the way it did. I think John Ray has made it clear he doesn't fully trust the Bahamian authorities. He thinks maybe they were a little too close to SBF.
Right. When you say acted the way they did, you mean in terms of not seizing what's...
They didn't really apprehend him. They knew that he had, they knew from his own executives that they had taken customer money, but they didn't take legal action against him.
And it would have been appropriate for them to do that.
It would have been appropriate for them to do that, but they only did it once they did it over a month later when the U.S. said, we need you to arrest this guy and we're going to extradite him. So there was a little bit of a tug of war, for the days that followed between the Bahamian authorities and the U.S. and who was going to be in charge of cleaning up this mess, right? And then now another completely surreal scene is SBF at his house, right? His parents are on the Stanford campus, on the edges of the Stanford campus. He is in custody. The FBI took him into custody. He was put under house arrest. He is now doing interviews from his home. He's been talking to crypto influencers, crypto journalists. There have been quite a few stories that have come out talking about the family, talking about Sam Bankman-Fried. He says his colleagues are no longer speaking to him, that, most of his friends were the people...
They listen to their lawyers.
Yeah,
he does not.
He said most of his friends were people who were working on the exchange with him.
Yeah.
And that, the only people who he's really talking to now are his parents who are standing by him. John Ray, who's still furious every time SBF opens his mouth, has been saying, he would wish he could stop making erratic and misleading public statements. But SBF is not stopping. And he also...
No, and he's trying to discredit John Ray, too. I mean, everything he says is like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, they're sniping.
Yeah. No, they are sniping at each other. And he's also giving interviews from his parents' home in Palo Alto to people like the best-selling author Michael Lewis, who keeps showing up in every single controversy. Michael Lewis is like, somebody asked for me?
Yeah, I know.
So he's doing interviews with Michael Lewis. That was right after New Year's. And what is also so very surreal is there's still a lot of discussion about what was going on in this Bahamas penthouse, right?
Oh, no.
No, we are going to talk about this because I feel like you have to ask yourself, if you and your best friends and then some people you wanted to be with romantically all got together and lived together in a luxury place on a beautiful tropical island offshore. And then you also tried to run a very complicated set of businesses together with very high risks involved and with a very volatile market and 134 different entities on tax shelters around the world with real customer money, billions of dollars. A number of the executives talked about using amphetamines, using drugs, sleeping.
Gentle listener, this weird story is so much weirder. Okay.
You just want to give a warning?
Just grab something, grab a hold of something.
Yeah, we're sorry, guys.
Maybe hot beverage. You want it, maybe go get some air, use the bathroom.
I think when you have people acting in an environment that doesn't have a whole lot of structure, it's unlikely that it's not going to end badly.
We're talking about 20 and 30 somethings with billions of dollars, and they kind of
living in a luxury resort in the same apartment. And they know how to make that money. I mean, they know how to make it, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to be responsible with it. And what they're taking, and Are you okay?
No, I haven't been okay.
You seem like you're sort of breaking down while trying to talk about it.
I now understand why you didn't tell me that this was the topic of this episode until the last possible minute.
Why?
Because it's freaky. It's disturbing. I don't want to think about these people.
Are you just upset because when they were all living in a weird cabal together in a romantic Gordian knot? I can't tell if
the
that's
answer
what's
to that is
freaking
yes.
you out.
Hey, I'm not, I don't, they keep bringing it up. They bring it up.
Yeah, it would have been better if Caroline Ellison hadn't posted a whole bunch of stuff about polyamory on her Tumblr account and then it got published everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to?
Yeah, I will give one quote from her only because I don't think we can dangle that and not share something. Yeah. But I will say this, guys. I'm really sorry.
It's so off the rails. None of us, we're not proud of what's happening now.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason why... So I had this...
It's part of the story. This is absolutely part of the story.
It is part of the story. I had a conversation today about when you decide what to share. I feel like there's some sound.
There's some sound. That? It's okay. Okay. I kind of like it. This is our
this is our bad backdrop.
Yeah. Well, this is.
All right. Are you ready?
This is our headquarters, and so what you're hearing is a toilet flushing somewhere in this building.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was. I'm sorry. I'm hearing it in my headphones as well, so I thought it was maybe from my own computer.
No.
All right. So we don't really know what was going on. In this penthouse apartment where they were running a multi-billion-dollar exchange. But we do know...
We wish we knew less.
Yeah, we do know that SBF dated his co-CEO at ALAMEDA Trading. Her name's Caroline Ellison, who we've mentioned earlier. He eventually made her the full CEO of ALAMEDA Trading. ALAMEDA was kind of the black hole that ended up swallowing billions of dollars. And she had posted on Tumblr about her foray, as she called it, into polyamory. And the New York Post wrote, it's unclear whether Ellison was in a polyamorous relationship with Sam Bankman-Fried, that they had broken up after an unspecified period of dating. But that generally speaking, it sounds like the group of people living in this penthouse together running this company, it was referred to by people who knew them as they were in a polycule, which is like a group of people engaged in polyamory. And she wrote,
none of us have a problem with that.
None of us have a problem with that. I think the problem is mixing that with running a multi-billion-dollar company is probably pretty hard. She wrote on Tumblr in 2020, when I first started my foray into poly, I thought of it as a radical break from my trad past, meaning traditional. But to be honest, I've come to decide the only acceptable style of poly is best characterized as something like, quote, imperial Chinese harem, unquote, which sounds awful. And also racist. Then she wrote, none of this hierarchical bullshit. Everyone should have a ranking of their partners. People should know where they fall on the ranking, and there should be vicious power struggles for the higher ranks. So it tells you a little, this woman is in her 20s. She's still in her 20s. She's one of the people cooperating in this case now and has pleaded guilty in the criminal case. And all I want to say is this. A lot of these posts on her Tumblr are a little bit helpful in understanding the kind of mentality of a few of the people involved in this. I think she tweeted about using amphetamines, and there's quite a few other sort of like comments that she's made throughout the years that have been dug up that are a little bit indicative of the kind of mentality of like the sort of like struggling and jockeying to be, in the higher ranks, that sort of thing. I think the other thing that I found concerning in her quotes was she talked about what was attractive in men. And she said, one of the things she thinks is cute are men who control most major world governments. I'm not really sure what that means exactly, but it just sounds like there's sort of a little bit of a need for power, a little bit of a need for control on a sort of this idea of like a master of the universe type striving. She wrote, here are what I think are some cute boy things. Again, this is the person who ran the multi-billion-dollar company ALAMEDA Trading, which was behind a lot of the losses of customer money and the FTX mess. She wrote, here's what I think are some cute boy things. Controlling most major world governments. Being responsible for many important inventions and scientific discoveries. Spatial reasoning abilities. Low risk aversion. If you are a boy who is driven to succeed at ambitious goals, you are valid. If you are a boy who arrives at opinions through logical reasoning, you are valid. If you are a boy with the confidence to advocate for unconventional ideas and take actions based on them, you are valid. And I don't know if idealizing taking risk for the sake of taking risk. And also this idea of like taking, it's very master of the universe type language. And it just, look, they're quite young. Like, I don't remember what I would have said at that age.
Okay,
but I don't think I would have sounded like that.
This is an 8th grader's diary.
It does sound like an 8th grader's diary. I think that's a good point. It's a good point.
Like, it's fine in an 8th grader's diary.
Well, remember, she posted this online.
Right.
These were not her private thoughts. These are the thoughts she shared with people.
That's why we're being critical, because there's nothing wrong with what she's saying, but go ahead and just keep those little thoughts right in your nugget.
It's not wrong, but I think what we can say is there seems to be a real patent lack of maturity in the quality of the thinking, and the fact that it was being put out into the open for critiquing when she was obviously very ambitious herself. I would not have put anything like that out into the open. I don't think I would have written anything like that even in my journal, which I do have. Yeah, I wouldn't have. Here's another point that I want to kind of leave us with. It won't be the end, I don't think, of this conversation, but I do want to say it before I forget. I interviewed a number of academics in finance, and one of them from Georgetown, James Angel, who's an associate professor of finance. He's at Georgetown University. He specializes in global financial markets, and this was what he said about kind of looking at how young these people are and how they were really saddled with responsibilities worth so many billions of dollars that they literally weren't really able to rise to the occasion.
Right.
Simply because they didn't have the experience.
Right.
He said, as an engineer from a tech school myself, I can kind of sympathize with a bunch of people from very sharp schools who think they know everything. The problem even smart people have is they don't know what they don't know. These guys were moving so fast, no one was looking over their shoulder. If Sam Bankman-Fried's bets had worked out, he would have been hailed as a visionary. And that is a very interesting point, because if these crypto bets had not gone south this year and they had not had all these holes show up, they would maybe not have been exposed for dipping into customer money. By the way, they already were dipping into customer money before this year. So they were already doing it, but they just may not have ever been found out.
And there are examples in Silicon Valley where people took weird risks, and nothing like this with customer money. But Bill Gates sort of famously sold Windows before he like bought it from somebody else, and just, like he did some horse trading there. Like, this kind of thing has happened, and so I think that point is really valid, because that kind of thing has happened. Like, there's Bill Gates and then there's Sam.
Yeah, and
it's not the same. It's not an equivalent. It's not the same.
That's a tough comparison.
No, but I think
customer money is. But that's the big thing here.
But it's hard. I sort of needed that for myself, because I was like, when I read that, I'm gonna have to beep this probably. But it's like, he's going to be seen as a visionary. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? This guy's a dipshit. He was a dipshit the whole time. At no point did he seem like a credible guy to me. I felt from the first time that I saw him, his whole like slovenly sartorial shtick, the whole like t-shirt shorts thing, I thought that was an affectation. Right from the beginning, I never bought it. I thought it was like Elizabeth Holmes and her like deep voice. I thought that it was bull. And I think he was already defrocked by the point I had seen him. This had already gone down. So I'm like, would I've spotted that right away? I don't know. But never passed the smell test with me. I was always deeply suspicious of this guy, and still am. And I've heard people talk about it. They're like, well, he's very nice. He's been nice to me. He's got a nice family. He's from a nice family. I'm like, yeah, okay, but I don't see him as a credible guy, like, at all. And I cannot believe people gave him that much money.
Yeah, I think the fact that some of Silicon Valley's, best and brightest were investing in FTX. Mm-hmm. And he was sort of well known for, this also came out as this company was filing for bankruptcy in November. It came out that while investor meetings were taking place with Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of FTX, that he was like playing video games and kind of ignoring most of the questions in his t-shirt. And that a lot of these investors, including like Sequoia Capital and some of, Silicon Valley investors who are considered very, very top notch and very good at what they do, were just salivating over him, like, oh, it's so cool how he rejects us as we ask him investor questions while he plays video games in front of us. Yeah, they were impressed.
Yeah,
and they were impressed he would underdress.
And I think he gamed them totally. I think he gamed them. I thought, yeah.
Yeah, he was playing a game. Wow, gaming.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, I think he gamed them from day one. I think it was, what is it, the FOMA? Like the fear of missing out. And they're like, oh, this guy's a genius. He's so aloof. So he must be smarter than us. So let's give him our money.
Yeah, he did. He built up a mystique, and he was very open about, dragging himself out from under his desk from sleeping. And then they'd go get him, and he'd come out to the meeting, and he'd be disheveled. And it was, he had a whole shtick, kind of like the Elizabeth Holmes had her own big marble eyes with her black turtleneck, Steve Jobs look. They all have their sort of thing.
Yeah, her like morning James Earl Jones voice.
I just didn't obsess over her voice. I always felt like Elizabeth Holmes sounded super congested.
It made me so uncomfortable. I can't listen to her.
I felt like she always sounds like this.
Yeah.
That's how she sounded to me, but she sounded congested. I never saw it as like a husky, attractive
It's not.
voice.
It was never attractive. No, and I'm not sure that it was meant to be. It was more like intimidating. It's sort of, she's like Dom.
She sounded like a female Data from like Star Trek.
Okay.
Kind of with the weird nasally voice, only a woman. So, okay, getting back to Sam Bankman-Fried.
Okay. What's the counterfactual? What does a good result for Sam look like to be able to get out of it? Yeah.
There's other examples on Wall Street of taking customer money. They're not that many that are this big, right? $8 billion, billions of dollars. That's unusual. The example that comes to mind immediately for me is Bernie Madoff. And the reason why is he did a similar thing where he took customer money from the start. I think that in this case, we can see that the exchange for SBF started in 2019, and they're saying that the taking of customer funds goes back to 2019. Now, does it start with the inception of the exchange? I think that's all going to be worked out in what happens next with law enforcement, looking through all the assets and the money flows. But Bernie Madoff was taking customer money from the very beginning.
And that was built into his plan from day one.
Yeah, Bernie Madoff never traded his customers' money. What he said he was doing more or less was running an investment fund, like a hedge fund. But what he did was just take their money, and that's it. He didn't put it into anything. Okay. He was putting it into an account, and then he'd spend it, or when somebody cashed out, he would give them their money, but he just keep taking
part
more.
Of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was really awful like that. And he kept posting all these great returns, which weren't real. So in his case, we're talking about SBF and would he have been hailed as a visionary if he had never been found out? Well, Bernie Madoff proves that you can be held as a visionary if you can keep it going and no one knows that you're taking customer money.
How long did Madoff do that?
Madoff started his investment advisory firm around, the early 1960s. And he started in the early 1960s, and he actually did invest in the very beginning, but he had a very small, he's just a really young guy at that time. There was a downturn in the stock market in 1962, and almost all of his customers got wiped out because he was trading penny stocks, and the penny stocks got hit the hardest. He was devastated. His father-in-law loaned him $30,000. He just handed the money back to the customers and made them whole and told them he had saved them. His trades were so good, they didn't lose any money in the downturn. And they thought he was so great. They kept investing with him. And that was the beginning. That's how he learned, if I just hand people back money and tell them it never got lost and I never have any big losses, then they'll think I'm great. Right. And so people wanted to believe, and they kept giving him money, and it kept going. And that's what's so interesting. Like, if the downturn of 2008, the financial crisis, hadn't happened, and people hadn't all grabbed, what happened to Bernie is something like what just happened here, in the sense that his investors all wanted to get their money out when the downturn happened. Too many came to him at once. He didn't have enough to cover it all. And so he went insolvent and had to admit what was going on. This is sort of like a short version of that, in the sense that they were dipping into customer funds to fund a hedge fund, and that they ran out, right? And they were found out. It's not the same thing as Bernie. I'm not saying it's the same, but in the sense of a downturn led to their exposure. That's exactly what happened here. The downturn to crypto markets basically exposed all of these holes and that they were using customer money. That's how Bernie was found out too.
And the crypto part of it is, it's such the Wild West where like Sam, his eccentricities were all part of his whole mystique. Like the weirdness of it was somehow burnished his, like
Silicon Valley loves these stories because when you have, remember, like Elizabeth Holmes also went to Stanford.
Yeah.
These stories of these wonderkind children coming out of these beautiful schools, and in the case of him, his parents being these very brilliant academics, it's a very appealing story. It sells really well, right? Somebody's starting to fundraise and they come from this more or less pedigreed background. It's easier to get investors interested in you because it looks like you're already a chosen one, right? You start out looking like you're a chosen one. Who knows how much pressure was on him, and that is not at all to be an apologist of his actions. But I think that there were a lot of people, again, who wanted to believe in that mystique.
Yeah. I have a take on this. Trump has always maintained that his call with Zelensky, right? He's always saying like, that was a perfect call. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with that. He was impeached and he still doesn't think he did anything wrong. And I wonder if Sam is sort of in that same headspace where he's just like, he's saying, he's like, no, I'm still worse. This company is solvent. Like what are you guys doing? Like this worked.
I think he
is
definitely.
He delusional?
Yeah, I think he is. And I think he drank his own Kool-Aid. I don't know how he's going to explain using customer money other than just blame his colleagues. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's just ultimately what it comes down. It's like, it doesn't, he's like, oh, my bad. Like, I think that's one thing John Ray was saying, like, or maybe one of the other people who Congress talked to, where it's like, well, yeah, we think he's a nice guy, but he's, ostensibly a nice guy. I personally, that's not my read, but he's very nice to me, but he broke the law, like for real.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that he's sorry. Oh, my bad. Like, dude, a lot of people lost a lot of money and we know what happens.
It's so much money. I mean, so people listening here are not going to be like looking at every single scandal and how much every scandal costs, right?
He doesn't feel it at all. That's the thing, is he doesn't feel it at all. He hurt so many people and they are screwed. Their lives are devastated and he doesn't feel any of that. That's the thing that comes to me where I'm like, that's where I started to get upset, because I'm like, I need you to feel this, buddy, because you messed with people. Yeah,
he definitely doesn't seem to fully understand the extent to which he's caused damage for just regular people. And remember, like, again, there was a huge push among his own family members about like the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, sort of a utilitarian sort of way of looking at things and improving the world. Like, if you can create this much scale, billions of dollars, you can create real change. And I think he just had his eye on that ball and may have, again, I don't know if, I've never been to business school. I write about business. Right. I don't know if they have a master class that's like, just in case you're really young and suddenly end up with tens of billions of dollars, here's a few tips on what not to do. Like, I don't think they give classes like that. They don't expect students to end up in that position that quickly. And they certainly don't expect them to have total agency over billions of dollars.
Well, it's the Wild West part of it. Like, it's happening now. Now is where they're figuring out what can go wrong. Like a charismatic person, Elizabeth Holmes, Sam comes in. You tell people something that they want to hear that is obviously crap.
Yeah, no, everybody wants to believe in that effortlessly, right? Yeah. That effortlessly perfect human that just is charismatic or attractive or kind of schlubby in a t-shirt.
He's an anti-hero, but I mean, he played against type. We were sick of seeing old white guys get rich. He's sort of, well, this guy's different. So yeah, cool. We can support that.
I don't know if it's that he was this every man that people wanted to believe in. There was a lot of reasons to see it in various ways, but certainly he like represented a kind of funny dream that certainly some people felt, remember, crypto is a specific industry that doesn't like to look like it's trying hard. Mm-hmm. It doesn't like to look like it takes man seriously, right? Yeah. There's this whole ethos around crypto in particular where you're not supposed to be looking like you're trying, right? You're supposed to be anti-authority and certainly anti-wearing a suit. And so the fact that he was dressed like that is probably not that surprising, being that he was a crypto entrepreneur, right? All right, we're going to talk. So before we outro, because it's 10, in this holiday break, while we were getting ready to do another podcast for all of you, our favorite Prince Harry of Windsor put out his book called Spare. And I remember seeing an interview with him and he was like, I wanted my story to be uplifting. And then you saw the title was called Spare. And you were like, but that's like a reference to spare air, an heir and a spare.
The heir and the spare.
And that seems sort of negative. Like if that's like the summary of your life, a spare, that's just kind of, that's a little bit of a downer. So I was a little surprised that he called it that. And then I thought, well, I guess Brits are always a bit sarcastic. So maybe it was more of a little bit of an ironic, sarcastic, oh, I guess this is what I'm all about.
Yeah, I chose to take it that way.
Yeah, I guess that's what, I guess it was the sarcastic, I am what you think I am.
Yeah, and I think it was on the theme of the ghostwriter also wrote Andre Agassi's book, which it's called Open. And it's like the same, actually, the same cover. It looks exactly the same. It's almost, I don't think it was the same photographer, but it's very similar.
It was all about a single word title.
Yeah.
He's like, I just want to use one word. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you read this book.
I
have not read it yet. I'm curious about it. I have seen the interviews with Prince Harry, and I want you to go. Take it away.
Nobody's going to care about this book in 3 months.
So you thought it was pretty lightweight?
It's pretty lightweight, yeah. I think he doesn't know what's extraordinary about his life. I think he wanted us to identify with him, I think. So he's like talking about all the stuff that maybe we would get. And I'm like, no, I don't care about that. I want to hear you have this extraordinary life. Your grandmother's a queen. And he does, and he sort of blurs those lines. Like you sort of forget. He calls her granny and he's actually able to get her on the phone. Like, what the hell? Like, that's insane. But he doesn't register any of that. And it doesn't come through to us. He's just talking to his grandmother, which is fine. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the whole point, is like, oh, he does have a normal life. But mostly, yeah, he had the sort of normal life.
Which he did not at all have. And he's like, me and my 3 bodyguards, he sort of throws in. Occasionally he'll talk about them. He's always got a couple of bodyguards with him. The main surprise was he just talks about his junk a lot in that book. That's the main takeaway. I'm like... Wait, when you say... So first of all, not that I want to know anything about it, because I don't. And by the way, I have a real aversion to people who can't stop doing that. Like anybody...
Talking about their junk?
Anyone, men, women, animal, vegetable, or mineral. If you're obsessed with talking about it, what's going on, man? I don't get what that means. But especially with Prince Harry, all I'm trying to do is say this to you, Reggie.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When you say a lot, do you mean like more than half dozen times?
No, but I would say there's 4 separate occasions where he's talking about his todger. And I'm like, okay, I came away from that book with that word. So I'm kind of okay with that. Like I think I'd heard that word before, but I'm like, I can use that. But do you want to, yeah.
Do I what?
Do you want to read the...
No.
No, okay.
No, I don't. So there is a scene that now has been memorialized.
Yeah.
Probably hundreds, if not thousands of times now on TikTok. Basically going through a scene where he talks about, I don't know why he was using Elizabeth Arden cream.
He went to the North Pole. He got some sort of frostbite.
Okay. He got frostbite on his parts.
Yeah.
And
his friend recommended
Elizabeth Arden cream. And then he went into this bizarre soliloquy about how his mother used this Elizabeth Arden cream on her lips and how he recognized the scent and how he used it on his
todger,
his frostbite in his area. And that's it. But people lost their minds and they posted it everywhere. And I guess there's him speaking the scene on Audible in his own voice, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Audible version of the book.
I listened to it. I listened to it on Audible. Yeah, no, he reads it.
Yeah. So I personally did not vote to talk about this part of the book. I just was curious if there was anything revealing about how the royal family works structurally or how these power balances work. But it doesn't sound like he says very much about that.
No, I think you come away feeling pretty badly about everyone. It just seems like they sell each other out for a headline on any given day.
It's incredible to me that the royal family cares so much about how they look in the press.
Oh, yeah.
It
seems like the only thing they care about.
Yeah, like personal image in the press seems to be like an obsession, which is really strange when you think about it. As a member of the press, the idea that the royal family would care so much when so often they just seem to not notice anything.
Yes, but that's baloney. It sounds like they micromanage it. Just the people behind the scenes seem really nasty, too. The people whose names we don't know, the private secretaries and stuff like that.
Yeah, that seems like a real toxic brew.
They sound awful. It's scary. It's scary. I mean, he makes his case in the end because they ditch him. They threw him to the wolves, him and Meghan. You just can't even believe it. Like, because there's real danger. Like, there's real danger for Harry and Meghan.
Yeah.
Like, let's be clear. Like, they are in danger every single day of their life, and they need that security. And to have the crown just be like, no, F you. It's unbelievable. I mean, they look so bad and just petty.
So this is the thing that really got me when I saw the interview with Anderson Cooper, where he basically talked about how more or less conniving everybody was.
I feel like he took it easy on him, by the way. He kind of jabs them, but he could have decapitated them, and he didn't.
Yeah, he's fairly understated.
Yeah.
My guess is he's trying not to look like he's overdoing it.
I think they can reconcile. Like, he can't. I think he probably still wants to.
He probably still wants to, but he's gone way beyond. I think he's gone way beyond. I think he also knows it, but he also doesn't. Again, it's about image. He doesn't want to publicly look like he's undeserving, right? So even if they're never going to make up with him, he still wants to look like the one who's being reasonable. So for people who are, I'm not really into the tittle tattle personally. I am very interested in how it all works from a power balance perspective, but I found the interviews to be illuminating in that it truly shows a family that seems to really lack love as a first priority, and that the main priority is power and sustaining it. And that's just sad.
My main takeaway was like, those people are not worth our time and consideration. That's what I came away from. Like, he didn't have a damn thing to say in that book.
That's really sad because this is an awfully large book.
Right.
I think writing your memoir really needs to come at a time in your life where you really do know what it is you need to say. Like, I personally wouldn't be ready to write a memoir right now. Mm-hmm. I feel like you have to really come, as you pointed out, like full circle in your story. I will say about Harry, the one arc that I have seen, at least just from witnessing, we remember Harry when he was a little lost.
Yeah.
And, I know people still think he's lost, but I can say that I personally think his attitude now and seeing the way he talked about his family situation and his, coming to America and leaving the royal family, like, he showed a certain amount of maturity and reflection in some of the decisions he's been making. And he has said several times that he looks at things differently, as now a father and as a husband and as somebody who wants to protect his family than he looked at it when he was younger. Even before he joined the military, that joining the military also helped ground him. He has had an arc. It's just not a complete arc.
I just am disappointed in the book because I think it could have been a lot better.
I would say that if you're leaning into anecdotes about penis cream, it's probably not a very satisfying narrative yet. Like, I'm surprised that they didn't say to him, we need to improve this narrative because you shouldn't need to tell stories that are lacking in substance. His life has already been fairly meaningful. It sounds almost like they could have done a better job of picking the stories they wanted to tell.
Yes. Yes, he did have a meaningful life, and that's what's interesting is because he started the Invictus Games, and he's actually done a lot of really good things. And I do feel like his heart's in the right place, and his mother's legacy. I mean, she's a character in the book. He kept coming back to her, and you and I talked before we recorded. I kept saying, I'm not someone who wants to dwell on like anniversaries of bad things, and he is. Like, they talk about her death every year, but there's a couple of times in that book that it's affecting. It's like you realize what she was. The work she did with AIDS, and that was a big deal. Yeah. That was a very big deal. She was a special lady.
Yeah. No, I there are these moments of bravery in the royal family by some of its, some of the more black sheep members, where you can see they're being a little bit brave or being a little bit bold in a good way. Yeah. Obviously, we've seen the opposite as well. I do think Harry puts up a more positive example than a lot of the other family members. And to be honest, I do think it might be somewhat harmful to the Will and Kate image, which has always been very squeaky clean, because it makes it look like they don't really care about his pain or the way they were being pummeled by the press, which is very sad. And maybe they do care, but they certainly haven't come out and publicly said, this was awful and we feel terrible about it.
And that's the messed up part. They won't come out. I wish Harry had been more explicit about this, because you get a glimpse of the relationship that the Crown has with the press. And the press has really got them by the ass. Like they won't, the Kate and Will won't denounce the press, is because they don't want to be in the crosshairs. That's pretty cowardly and crazy. Oh, yes.
Because honestly, the press need the royals more than the royals need the press.
They don't believe. The thing you come away from that book is that it seems like the royals don't believe that. It seems like the royals are like, the press is really important because they can build us up or tear us down, and they're afraid. They're afraid of the press. Oh, they totally. I mean, there's just so much fear.
That's really interesting, because if they're afraid of the press, that explains a lot to me.
That's what they're. That's
so
what
maybe
it
I
is.
should read the book.
I mean, that's what it
very
is.
Interesting.
They're afraid. That's my takeaway. Ultimately, the press has the power in that relationship.
Interesting.
In that dysfunctional relationship, you wouldn't think that. And Harry does. That's between the lines. Harry doesn't say that, but that's my takeaway.
Well, that's an unfortunate dynamic, because as a member of the press should not ever see itself as in charge of world leaders or events. That is a dysfunctional kind of dynamic. And if the royal family really feels that way, that is poisonous. Because once you start acting just for image, you're right. At that point, you're kind of lost.
You're describing journalism, and the people covering the Crown, those aren't journalists. I don't know what the hell they are, but that's not. They sell newspapers, but they're not journalists.
The tabloid journalists in England have always been seen as very aggressive and not very fair and quite nasty. I remember the phone hacking scandals and News of the World, and
that's a part of the book.
Absolutely appalling.
He should have done 3 chapters on that, and he did like 3 pages. And that's what's terrifying, is he talks about that from the inside, because all of a sudden there's reporters in they're freaking out. They're like, how the hell do these people know? And it's they're questioning their close friends. It's all of a sudden like there's boogeyman in every corner. It's like it's all of a sudden, I'm not trusting you because you're the only person that knew I was going there, and there's the press.
Yeah.
And he could have gone so much deeper into that, and he just didn't.
Yeah. No, it was really the reason why that exploded. I was living in England at the time of the phone hacking scandals.
Yeah.
It was happening all the time to the royal family, and nothing was really done. And
nothing.
Nothing was really done. And here's what ended it. Here's what made the whole thing explode. A young girl went missing, and somebody hacked the young girl's phone or the mother's phone. Basically, it was her final phone call. And somebody hacked it, listened to the message, took it down so they could report on it, and then they deleted it so the police could never get the message to try to determine what happened to her. And when it was found out that this final piece of evidence, very crucial piece of evidence, was deleted because somebody had hacked the phone and had gotten her last communication, that's when the whole thing boiled over, because people could not bear that this, young girl who had disappeared and that her final communication was more or less absconded with by some nasty hacking journalist.
So Harry references that girl, but you told more of the story just now than he does in the book. And he should have talked about that, and he didn't.
The writer probably should have done a deeper dig. Also, this memoir was generated very fast.
Yeah.
I mean, too fast.
Yeah.
This should have been a years-long project. So, okay, we've said enough. Hopefully you can edit that down to something tiny. That doesn't...
we're just gonna hear the word Todger and then just to music.
Yeah, so I don't know what our cold open is going to be, but any cold open that does not include the word Todger would be great.
All right, well, that's obviously going to be the open, so...
Now we're whipping Lambos like we pop stars. My wife's boyfriend even let me eat a Pop-Tart.
Yeah, if we have a song for this podcast, I think we're gonna do this one.
It's too bad because like it's a podcast, so people can't tell that we are both aggressively twerking right now.
You're aggressively twerking.
I like the stock.
You like it?
We on our Walter White shit. We the ones who knock.
I am the one who knocks.
I like the style.
This is Leah McGrath Goodman, and you're listening to Column C. You can also find Column C on Substack under Column C by LMG, a column about corruption, climate change, commodities, crypto, all things curious. Go and have a look, sign up. It's not a contract, it just puts you in the game.